Marhaban, hola, and hello. Welcome to my channel. Today's video is about bringing the local community into your school to help ease the transition for refugee and migrant students. I'll put links to all of the studies that I talk about in the description box below, and I encourage you to read them and then comment here with your thoughts. I'd be interested to see what you found interesting or helpful. Also, for everyone watching, please like and subscribe, then hit the bell for notifications of regular content relating to migrants and refugees in the educational system and the news. So I've done quite a bit of research recently about the role of school leaders in creating and maintaining positive learning environments for refugee students. There's a lot of information about what works from a curriculum standpoint, and I'll be looking at that in other videos. The focus of this video is developing connections between the local community and the transplanted students. There are case studies from around the world that show local educational leaders bringing members of the community into their schools to help ease the transition for refugee and migrant students. And when this is done effectively, good things seem to happen. The first case study I want to talk about comes from an elementary school in Texas. The school received 25 Hmong refugee children in a single school year, which is a huge number considering that according to the National Center for Educational Statistics, the average size of a Texas primary school is 551 students. So if the school was average sized, it received a 5% increase in enrollment specifically from these refugee students. The principal of this school was lucky enough to have a teacher on staff who had previous experience with a program designed to connect community social work organizations, school staff, and parents to help ease the transition for refugee students. And the teacher and principal worked together to start a program in their school. The program operated after school in the students' school building and had 3 goals: to build connections between the families and the school, between the parents and the children, and between families and the community. One of the key parts of the program was recruiting members of the Hmong American community to hold various leadership positions. I want you to think about that for a minute. How often do you invite community leaders into your schools to lead programs? Sure, we might ask community members to do a presentation or speak at an assembly, but when was the last time you asked them to help you plan a program or meet students in an informal setting? It makes sense to partner with established representatives from the migrant and refugee communities when implementing programs for those communities. But if you're a school employee who isn't part of that minority community, you might not know who the important people are. So how do you find out who is a representative or an important member of a refugee community? Well, I think you have to just ask. Ask your parent liaison, ask local religious leaders, ask the Chamber of Commerce, find out who the leaders of the refugee and migrant communities are, and then recruit them because you want their knowledge and their endorsement. They will give you information about what students and families think they need. If your program is well designed, staffed, and funded, but it doesn't speak to the concerns of the students and their families, you will waste resources and lose the community's trust. Also, sharing leadership with the refugee community leaders will lend your program legitimacy. Endorsements are as important in education as they are on Amazon. A positive review and the talking up of your program from a member of the refugee community to that same community will be far more effective at messaging than you could ever be. And showing the established refugee community and the newly arrived students and their families that you trust and value their input and expertise will give them an incentive to integrate into the schools and local society. It will say that you want them to be successful and actively involved in the school and society. Are you doing something like this already? How's it working? Let me know in the comments below. The second case study comes out of Hong Kong, which, as many of you know, is a very multicultural city. There are large numbers of migrants from mainland China who often speak Mandarin instead of Hong Kong's Cantonese dialect, and who relocated after the British ceded the colony to China in 1997. Significant populations of Southeast Asians are also part of the community. This particular study explores how principals change their leadership practices to foster social justice in light of demographic changes like the enrollment of large groups of cultural minority migrants. The major findings of this study are that principals who believe that migrant students should be included in their schools found ways to include them. Also, principals sometimes had to stretch the boundaries of school policy to address student needs. Principals who actively engaged with the community, school staff, parents, and central administrations to create a joint vision were successful in making positive changes in their school environments. And finally, Principals who proactively embrace the challenges that came along with increasing the diversity of their student populations were able to connect their students and the community. Now, there's a lot of material there, and all of the findings are really interesting, but I don't have time to talk about everything in detail. So if you want to read more, remember the references for all the studies that I mentioned today are in the description box below. And if you do read any of the studies, I'd love to know what stands out to you. And so comment below with your thoughts and your takeaways. So back to the Hong Kong study. The part that we're going to pay particular attention to is the second finding, stretching the boundaries of school policy to enact change and address student needs. There's a fantastic idea from one of the principals on how to engage the community within the school and intentionally integrate students and community. The principal was concerned about the lack of integration of the different ethnicities and nationalities in his community, and let's face it, that is not a problem restricted to Hong Kong. His solution was to bring native Hong Kong community members into his school to explain Hong Kong cultural traditions like Christmas. The Hong Kong natives were of course familiar with the secular and religious traditions of Christmas, having been British and therefore officially Anglican for over 100 years. It had been part of their tradition for generations, but the holiday was much less familiar to the mainland Chinese and Southeast Asians. By using Christmas and other Hong Kong-specific cultural lessons as a method of involving the community within the school, first, he introduced the Hong Kong natives, who are an aging and shrinking population, but who control most of the community, to the future of their community, the migrant children. Second, he helped the children meet community leaders so they have touch points in Hong Kong society. And third, he showed the community of Hong Kong natives and migrants alike what was happening in the school and how hard the school was working for them to shape the next generation of their society. So what does this look like in your school or district? Ideally, you would take whatever the biggest cultural indicators are. So maybe it's a national holiday, or maybe a local one like the Apple Blossom Festival where I grew up. Maybe it's a high school football team or ice hockey team. Use whatever the things are that make your community come together, and then bring community members into the school to talk to the classes about why this thing is so important. Talk about the history behind the tradition, what it means to the community. Tell the kids why they should care. Start that dialogue. It's best in small groups like a single class, because then the migrant and refugee kids can ask questions and share experiences of their own. Maybe you can even have some sort of school field trip or event to bring the students out into the community to participate in that thing. So they go to a football game or they watch a parade. The important thing for you to do is facilitate dialogue and relationships between the students and the community members. So what community traditions exist in your area that refugee students should understand? Let me know in the comments below. Today's final example of local school leaders reaching out into the community to serve their migrant and refugee populations comes to us from Australia. There's a program funded by Victoria's provincial government designed to help refugee students who decline to attend the 12-month intensive English training centers and instead enroll straight away in standard Australian schools. The program is optional and includes resources and trainings for both school personnel and students on topics ranging from how to navigate the school system to mental health to dealing with trauma. Although this is a province-wide program, there are helpful bits for local school leaders in areas where refugees and asylum seekers are being placed by agencies. So the first tip is to put together a refugee action team with refugee placement agency representatives, school personnel, healthcare providers, mental health providers, financial education resources for parents, community leaders, and any other relevant experts from the community to support your growing community of refugee and migrant students. Thinking back to our first example from Texas, you're definitely going to want to include members of the refugee community on that team as well. The second tip is to share resources and networks across schools in a region. I want you to think about the schools in neighboring districts where students often transfer to or from. This is a cost-effective solution and gives some of the student wraparound services continuity. If you have trauma counselors from the community who go into schools to meet with groups of students, it is disruptive and potentially a setback when students move to a school mid-year. If community counseling groups can serve multiple schools in a region, especially if those schools are carefully chosen to follow the patterns of student moves, some of that disruption can be avoided. Our final tip from this study is, as the school leader, you must value the work and participation of your staff on the Refugee Action Team, enough to give paid time for training, team meetings, and participation in events. This means you need to put your dollars where your heart is. So to wrap things up, these 3 case studies offer realistic, practical, effective solutions to the challenges that local education leaders face in creating positive learning environments for migrants and refugees. You need to bring the community into the school, build relationships between the community and the migrants, offer wraparound services, and include migrant representatives in your leadership. All of these are attainable goals. So what will you do in your school? Like, subscribe, and comment below to let me know what's happening in your schools and what initiatives you already have in place to help your refugee and migrant students. Did you get new ideas today? Tell me those too. See you soon. Ciao.